Hello friends, how are you? Shall we start our class today? So let's go. The train sped through the countryside, its rhythmic clatter soothing and steady. Evelyn sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the blur of green fields rushing past. She wasn't really looking at anything in particular, just lost in her thoughts. A few months ago, she had made a decision to leave her small hometown behind and venture to the city. The reason for the trip, however, was unclear even to her. Maybe she was searching for something or someone she couldn't name. She shifted in her seat, glancing at the other passengers. Most of them were either lost in books or headphones, their faces blank and expressionless. But then her eyes landed on him. He was seated a few rows ahead, staring down at his phone. There was nothing particularly remarkable about his appearance. Tall, casually dressed in a black hoodie and jeans, but there was an air of quiet intensity about him. He seemed disconnected from the world, lost in his own thoughts, much like she was. Without really thinking, Evelyn took a deep breath and stood up, walking toward the bathroom at the end of the car. As she passed his seat, their eyes met for just a second, a fleeting moment. He looked away quickly, but something about the encounter lingered in her mind. She returned to her seat, wondering if it had been her imagination, but when she glanced back toward him, their eyes met again. This time there was a small, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark curiosity. Evelyn debated for a moment, then stood up once more. With her heart pounding in her chest, she walked over to the empty seat next to him and sat down. She had no idea what she was doing. She didn't even know his name. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. The man looked up, his eyes studying her for a brief moment. He seemed surprised, but then his expression softened. "Hey," he replied, the word coming out more relaxed than she expected. He shifted a little, making room for her to sit more comfortably. "I wasn't expecting company." Evelyn smiled. "Neither was I," she said, a little awkwardly. He chuckled, the sound genuine and warm. "You're on your way to the city too?" She nodded, trying to hide the way her heart raced. "Yeah, just visiting some family." "You?" "Business," he said, giving a slight shrug. "I'm Daniel." "Evelyn." The brief exchange felt oddly intimate, like two strangers who had just shared a private moment. Neither of them seemed ready to break the silence, yet neither wanted to let it stretch on too long. They started talking about the journey itself, the scenery outside, and eventually their lives in general. It wasn't long before the conversation turned personal. Evelyn learned that Daniel was in the city to finalize some work on a project that had taken him months to complete. He'd been stressed out, running on barely enough sleep, and was hoping this trip would give him a chance to reset. As for Evelyn, she shared just a little about her own life, a vague mention of a difficult breakup and the need to reconnect with her roots. What surprised her the most was how easy it felt to talk to him, how quickly she let down her guard, even for a stranger. There was something about him, something in his demeanor that made her feel safe. Daniel, too, seemed more open than he normally would be. His usual cynicism was absent, replaced by a surprising sense of calm that Evelyn found comforting. His humor was dry, but there was an undertone of kindness she couldn't quite place. And as the train chugged along, heading into the unknown, Evelyn felt a small flicker of excitement. Maybe this trip wasn't just about family. Maybe it was about something or someone she hadn't anticipated. As the landscape blurred and the train began to slow down, Daniel leaned back in his seat, stretching his arms above his head. "I didn't expect to enjoy this ride as much as I have," he said, looking at her with a grin. "I guess sometimes the best moments come from the most unexpected places." Evelyn smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Yeah," she agreed. "I think I might just be starting to believe that too." The train slowed further, signaling that they were approaching the city. Their stop was near, but neither of them seemed in any rush to say goodbye just yet. The days passed quickly, and though they had parted ways at the train station, Evelyn and Daniel couldn't shake the connection that had sparked between them. As fate would have it, they kept running into each other. The city felt so vast, yet there they were, on the same path, meeting again and again, as if the universe had decided they were meant to cross paths. It started innocently enough. One morning, as Evelyn was grabbing coffee at a cafe near her cousin's apartment, she spotted him again. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the busy street, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of him. She almost passed by him without a second thought, but something tugged at her. Was it coincidence? Or something more? "Daniel!" She called out, hesitating slightly. He turned toward her, a look of mild surprise on his face, followed by a grin that seemed to reach his eyes. "Evelyn, I didn't expect to see you here." She laughed, feeling a sense of relief flood over her. "Yeah, me neither. I guess we have the same taste in coffee shops." "Seems like it," he said with a raised eyebrow. "Want to join me?" And so it began what felt like a series of happy accidents. A coffee shop here, a walk in the park there, each encounter building on the last, until they were spending more and more time together. As the days went by, their conversations grew more intimate. They'd talk about everything and nothing, about their childhoods, their dreams, their biggest regrets. Daniel revealed that he had moved to the city for a fresh start after a failed relationship, a painful breakup that had left him questioning himself. Evelyn, too, shared her own heartbreak, describing how she had been stuck in a toxic relationship for far too long, one that had drained her self-worth and made her feel unimportant. But with Daniel it was different. He made her feel heard, seen, and understood in ways she hadn't felt in a long time. His sense of humor was dry but sharp, making her laugh in ways she hadn't in months. There was a raw honesty about him that she admired, and before long she found herself looking forward to their meetups more than she had expected. One evening, after a long walk through the city streets, they found themselves sitting on a bench, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The night was still, peaceful, but there was an undeniable tension in the air, one that neither of them could ignore. "I never thought I'd find someone like you in a city like this," Daniel said softly, breaking the silence. "It's like the world's so big, but here you are, and it feels like I've known you for much longer than just a few days." Evelyn turned her head to look at him, her heart fluttering unexpectedly. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's strange, isn't it? How someone can come into your life out of nowhere and suddenly everything feels different." Daniel met her gaze, and for a moment neither of them said anything. They just sat there, the weight of their connection hanging between them, unspoken but clear. Without thinking, Evelyn reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was electric, a simple touch that seemed to send a spark through both of them. Daniel didn't pull away. Instead, he held her hand gently, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "I didn't expect this," he said, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. "Neither did I," she replied, her voice catching in her throat. "But I'm glad it's happening." The moment felt perfect, like something out of a dream, but in the back of her mind, Evelyn couldn't shake the nagging thought that something was missing. Her heart was pulling her in one direction, but her mind was clouded with doubts about getting too close too fast. She pulled her hand away slowly, her gaze falling to the ground. "Maybe we should take things slow," she suggested, her voice hesitant. "I don't want to rush into something that might not be real." Daniel didn't seem offended. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I get it," he said. "I'm not in a rush either. I think we've both been through enough to know that good things take time." The air between them grew quieter, more comfortable. For a moment, there was no need for words. Their connection was enough to fill the silence. Evelyn knew that they were treading into deep waters. She wasn't ready to dive in fully, but the pull toward Daniel was undeniable. She just hoped that, whatever happened, they would be able to weather whatever storms life threw their way. It wasn't long before Evelyn and Daniel became inseparable. Their connection, though still young, was undeniable. Their days were filled with shared laughter, long walks, deep conversations, and moments of silence that spoke louder than words. It was everything Evelyn had hoped for, everything she didn't know she was looking for. But as they grew closer, something started to feel off. There were moments when Daniel would become distant, his eyes clouded with thoughts he wouldn't share, and his conversations seemed to shift, less about their dreams and more about the weight of the world on his shoulders. Evelyn noticed it but didn't press him. She wanted to believe it was just the stress of his work or the remnants of his past relationships. She wanted to believe everything would be okay. Then, one evening, the truth came crashing down. Evelyn was out with a friend, having dinner at a small, cozy restaurant. The evening was light-hearted, full of laughter and chatter. Just as she was about to take a bite of her dessert, she received a text message that would change everything. It was from a number she didn't recognize. "Hey, I think you need to know this about Daniel." Her stomach dropped as she read on, her heart pounding in her chest. The message contained screenshots, conversations between Daniel and another woman. The tone was flirtatious, intimate, and filled with promises of secret meetups. The woman signed off with a kiss emoji. It hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. She felt numb, like the world had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. Daniel, the man she had trusted, the man who had shared so many personal details about his life, had been lying to her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Her friend noticed her change in demeanor, but Evelyn couldn't bring herself to explain. All she could think about was the betrayal, and her mind kept replaying the images in the message. How could he have done this? How could he be this person? That night, Evelyn went back to her cousin's apartment and found herself staring at her phone, trying to convince herself that it was some sort of mistake. Maybe there was an explanation? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the signs had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface. His secrecy, the times he'd avoided her questions, the way he always kept his phone close to him when they were together. A part of her wanted to confront him immediately, but she hesitated. Her emotions were a chaotic storm, and she wasn't sure how to navigate the anger, hurt, and confusion swirling inside of her. Instead, she chose to wait. The next day, she met Daniel at their usual spot in the park. He was waiting for her, a smile on his face, his eyes lighting up when he saw her approach. But Evelyn couldn't return his smile. Her stomach twisted, and she felt like she was walking through a haze. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice warm, but there was something about it, something that didn't sit right with her. "How's everything? You seem off." Evelyn nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm fine," she said, but it was a lie. She couldn't pretend everything was okay anymore. They walked in silence for a few moments before Daniel reached out, gently touching her arm. "What's going on?" he asked again, concern lacing his tone. Evelyn stopped walking and turned to face him. Her voice was barely a whisper as she asked, "Who is she, Daniel?" Daniel looked taken aback, his face pale. What are you talking about?" "The woman," Evelyn said, her voice growing stronger. "The one you've been texting, the one you've been seeing behind my back." For a long moment, Daniel didn't say anything. His eyes darted away from hers, his expression shifting from confusion to guilt. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but no words came out. Evelyn's heart was pounding, and she felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal, like a knife twisting in her chest. I can explain," Daniel finally stammered, his voice filled with regret. "It's not what you think." But Evelyn shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "You should have told me the truth. I trusted you." Daniel stepped forward, grabbing her hands in an attempt to steady her. "Evelyn, please. I never meant to hurt you. I've been struggling with things I didn't know how to talk about. It was a mistake, a stupid one. But I swear I care about you." Evelyn's hands shook as she pulled away from him. "A mistake," she echoed, her voice breaking. "You've been lying to me." "That's not a mistake, Daniel. That's betrayal." She didn't wait for him to respond. Without another word, she turned and walked away, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. Her mind was racing, her heart shattered. She had given him everything, her trust, her vulnerability, and he had thrown it all away. As she walked through the park, Evelyn didn't know where she was headed, only that she needed to get away, to put as much distance as possible between herself and him. The weight of the betrayal felt unbearable, and though she had expected pain, she hadn't anticipated how deeply it would cut. The days that followed were a blur of emotions for Evelyn. She kept herself busy, but no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, her thoughts kept returning to Daniel. The pain of betrayal gnawed at her, eating away at the trust she had carefully built. The quiet moments, when she allowed herself to reflect, were the hardest, her heart aching as memories of their time together flickered like fragile flames in her mind. She wanted answers. She wanted closure. But above all, she wanted to understand how he could do this. And so, when the texts from the unknown woman continued to haunt her, Evelyn knew she couldn't avoid the confrontation any longer. One evening, she found herself outside Daniel's apartment building. Her hands were clammy, her heart thumping in her chest, but she couldn't back down now. She had to hear the truth from him, no matter how much it hurt. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the entrance. When she reached his door, she hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure what kind of reaction she'd get. Would he try to explain himself, or would he shut down completely? But she had to face this. She knocked twice. The sound echoed through the hallway, and a moment later Daniel opened the door. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and concern. The moment their gazes met, he seemed to shrink back, guilt flashing across his features. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low. "I didn't expect you to come here." She crossed her arms, trying to steady herself. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady, though her insides felt like a storm was brewing. "About what happened?" "About her." Daniel looked like he was about to say something, but Evelyn cut him off. "Don't try to deny it," she said, her tone sharper now. "I know everything." He winced, stepping back slightly as if he were bracing for impact. "Evelyn, please." "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." She shook her head, unable to keep the anger from creeping into her voice. "You're sorry? You lied to me, Daniel. For weeks. You've been seeing someone else behind my back, and you think an apology is enough?" "Evelyn," he said, his voice pleading, "I made a mistake. But it wasn't what you think. It wasn't about her, it was about me." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, it was about you?" "You betrayed me. That's the bottom line." "I was confused," he said quietly. "I didn't know what I wanted. I've been holding on to this pain from my past, and I let it cloud everything. But I swear to you I never intended to hurt you. She was a distraction. It was stupid, and I regret it more than anything." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, her emotions swirling. The words he spoke made sense in some way, but they didn't erase the hurt. "So what? You just used me as a rebound? A way to feel better about yourself?" Daniel looked stricken, his face twisting in regret. "No, that's not it. I care about you. More than I ever thought possible. But I was lost. I didn't know how to deal with everything. And when you walked into my life, everything felt right again. But I was still a mess inside. I made a horrible decision, and now I'm paying the price." Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but the damage had already been done. "I don't know if I can believe you anymore," she whispered. "You broke my trust." There was a long silence between them, thick with the weight of what had been said. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice soft but steady. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I'm not asking for that right now. All I'm asking is for a chance to prove that I can be better. For you." Evelyn shook her head, her mind a whirlwind. She had loved him, and that love had been shattered in an instant. She didn't know what to do with the mess of emotions she was feeling. Was there room for forgiveness? Could she even trust him again after everything he had done? "Maybe you don't deserve a chance," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I need time. I need to figure out what's best for me. And right now, I don't know what that is." Daniel's face fell, and Evelyn could see the pain in his eyes. "I understand. If you want space, I'll give it to you. But I'll wait for you, Evelyn. I'll wait as long as it takes. I just need you to know that I'm sorry, and I'll do anything to make this right." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She simply turned and walked away, her heart heavy, unsure of what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever go back to the way things were, but as she left his apartment building, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something far more complicated. The days stretched into a painful silence between Evelyn and Daniel. Time moved slowly for Evelyn, each tick of the clock bringing her closer to a decision she didn't feel ready to make. She spent her days distracted by work, friends, and the hum of daily life, but her nights were filled with endless thoughts of him, of them. There was a deep ache in her chest every time she remembered their shared moments, the late-night talks, the laughter, the feeling of being understood. She missed him. But that didn't change the fact that he had hurt her, and trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. Every time she thought about forgiving him, her mind returned to that image of the text message, the proof of his betrayal. She felt like she was trapped in a loop, unable to escape the cycle of wanting him back and knowing she couldn't trust him again. Evelyn spent hours on her phone, staring at his messages. Daniel had been texting her daily, but his words had lost their warmth. They were apologetic, desperate even, but they didn't make the pain go away. She found herself scrolling through their old conversations, reading the sweet messages they'd exchanged before everything had crumbled. It was a cruel reminder of how easily things could fall apart. But despite her confusion, one thing became clear. She couldn't continue like this. She needed space. She needed to breathe without the constant pull of the past. And so she made a decision. She would confront the situation once and for all, not just with Daniel but with herself. That evening, Evelyn found herself once again walking toward the park where it all started. The air was cool, and the fading light of dusk created a soft glow over the trees. She'd come here often in the past, but tonight it felt different. It felt like a place of reflection, of figuring out where she stood. She sat on a bench, her thoughts racing. She replayed their last conversation over and over again in her mind. Was she being too harsh? Was she pushing him away because she couldn't handle the pain? But then another thought crept in. If she forgave him, would she be able to move forward? Would she ever look at him the same way again? As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel, once again apologizing and expressing his desire to fix things. "Evelyn, I know I've hurt you and I don't know how to make it right. But I promise you I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please let me prove to you that I can be better. Just give me a chance." Evelyn stared at the words, the weight of them heavy in her hands. She wanted so badly to believe him. She wanted to believe that he had changed, that he could be the man she had once fallen for. But there was still a part of her that couldn't forget the betrayal. The hurt was too fresh, too raw. How could she forgive him without risking repeating the same mistake? For the first time in days, Evelyn let herself cry. The tears weren't just for the betrayal, but for the uncertainty that gripped her heart. She had never wanted to face this kind of decision. She had never imagined that love could come with so much pain, with so many difficult choices. After some time, Evelyn wiped her tears and stood up. She wasn't ready to make a decision yet, but she knew she had to stop letting the situation control her. She had to take control of her own life, of her own heart. And that meant giving herself the time and space to heal. She texted Daniel back, her fingers shaking slightly as she typed. "I need more time. I need to figure this out on my own. Please respect that." She sent the message and stared at her phone for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. As she pocketed her phone and walked away from the bench, she felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't the answer she wanted to give him, but it was the answer she needed to give herself. She couldn't rush healing. The days following Evelyn's decision were some of the hardest of her life. Time, it seemed, had slowed down to a crawl. Every part of her was in turmoil, torn between the love she still felt for Daniel and the overwhelming pain that refused to let go. She tried to focus on her work, spending her days immersed in her projects to avoid the constant ache in her chest. But the nights were the hardest. In the quiet moments, the loneliness was deafening. She'd gone back to her routine, meeting friends for coffee, spending time at the gym, doing everything she could to feel normal. But it wasn't enough. There was a void inside her, and no matter what she did, nothing could fill it. Every time she saw something that reminded her of Daniel, whether it was a song they used to listen to or a place they had visited together, the memories came rushing back. They were bittersweet, filled with both love and regret. But the worst part was the silence. The absence of his messages, his voice, the way he used to make her feel. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the sudden emptiness that followed. She missed the way he'd held her, the way he'd promised to always be there. It felt like she was living in the space between two worlds, one where she was still in love with him, and one where she couldn't trust him anymore. Then, one evening, after another long and lonely day, Evelyn's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, and her first instinct was to ignore it. But something made her answer. Maybe it was the uncertainty, maybe it was the lingering hope that this call could bring her some kind of clarity. "Hello," she said, her voice hesitant. For a moment there was silence on the other end. Then a familiar voice broke through. "Evelyn!" Daniel's voice was strained, like he had been holding back. "I know you need time, and I respect that. But I had to tell you something. Something I've been keeping from you." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Daniel?" I've been seeing a therapist," he said quickly, his voice shaking. "I didn't want you to know because I was ashamed. But I need you to understand something. The reason I did what I did, it wasn't because of you. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I was broken. I've been carrying this weight for so long, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to ask for help." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She had expected an apology, maybe even an explanation, but not this. Not this raw honesty. "I know it doesn't excuse what I did," Daniel continued, his voice breaking, "but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to fix myself, to understand why I made those choices. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to tell you the truth. The whole truth." Evelyn stood there in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. She hadn't expected this vulnerability, this willingness to confront his demons. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt, but it was something. A part of her wanted to believe him, to think that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. But another part of her feared that it was all just a part of the same cycle of lies. "You're seeing a therapist?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I was afraid," Daniel admitted. "Afraid of facing my own issues. Afraid that I wasn't good enough for you. But I know now that I can't keep hiding. I want to be a better man for you, for myself, for us, if you'll let me." The silence between them stretched long, each of them waiting for the other to speak. Evelyn's mind raced, torn between her desire to believe him and her fear of being hurt again. Could she take a leap of faith? Could she trust him when everything inside her screamed to walk away? "Evelyn," Daniel's voice was gentle now, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not because I want you back right now, but because I want to show you that I can change. I need you to know that I'm serious about getting better, about being a better man." The sincerity in his voice tugged at something deep inside her. She didn't have an answer, not yet. But she knew one thing. She couldn't make a decision without giving herself time to heal first. The question was, could she find it within herself to forgive him? I don't know what to say," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Daniel. But I'm listening. I'm giving you a chance. But it's up to you to prove to me that you can change." There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes." As she hung up the phone, Evelyn felt a strange sense of relief. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was taking control of her own destiny. Maybe there was still hope for them, or maybe there wasn't. But she knew one thing. It was up to her to decide what came next. The next few days felt like a blur for Evelyn. The call from Daniel had left her with more questions than answers, but there was something about his vulnerability that had struck a chord within her. For the first time since their fallout, she began to feel a flicker of hope. Could this really be the turning point? Could he actually be serious about changing, about becoming the man he promised to be? But despite the small glimmer of hope, the skepticism lingered. Evelyn was no fool. She knew that words were easy to say, but actions were what truly mattered. She couldn't afford to get caught up in a cycle of empty promises. She needed to see real change. Her daily routine remained unchanged: work, gym, socializing with friends, but now there was a new sense of awareness in her. She found herself questioning her feelings more often, wondering if her desire to give Daniel a second chance was driven by love or the fear of being alone. Love was complicated, messy even. But the idea of healing, of truly moving on from the hurt, was even harder to grasp. Evelyn made a conscious decision to focus on herself. She started journaling more regularly, pouring her thoughts and emotions onto the pages. She needed to understand what she truly wanted, what was best for her heart. One thing she knew for sure was that forgiveness wasn't something that could be rushed. It had to come naturally, and only when she was truly ready. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel remained patient. His messages continued to arrive, though they were fewer, less desperate. Evelyn could sense that he was respecting her space, and in a way that gave her a sense of comfort. It was as though he had finally accepted that healing couldn't be rushed, and that was something she respected. But then, one morning, as Evelyn was preparing for work, she received another message from him. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words, "Evelyn, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I know I have to prove myself to you, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. I want to show you that I've changed. I'd like to meet just the two of us to talk. No pressure. Just us. Let me know if you're open to it." The message was simple, but it struck Evelyn deeply. It wasn't just the content of the message that affected her. It was the fact that he respected her need for space, that he wasn't pushing her for answers. He wasn't trying to rush things. Instead, he was letting her take control of the situation. Evelyn sat with the message for a moment, contemplating. Could this be the opportunity she needed to gain some closure? Could a conversation, face to face, help her understand whether or not they had a future together? She felt a mixture of excitement and dread at the thought of meeting him again. Part of her still longed for the connection they had shared, but another part of her was terrified of getting hurt again. Could she truly forgive him? Could she trust him with her heart after everything that had happened? After some time, Evelyn made up her mind. She texted him back, "I'll meet you. Let's talk. But I want to be clear that I'm still figuring things out. This doesn't mean I'm ready to jump back into anything. I need to see if we can rebuild something, but that will take time." She hit send and immediately felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't rushing into anything, but she was willing to explore the possibility of healing. She was allowing herself the chance to feel the full range of emotions: fear, hope, confusion, and trust that whatever happened, she would be okay. The meeting was scheduled for the following weekend. As the days drew closer, Evelyn found herself feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. It wasn't just a simple conversation. It was a pivotal moment, one that could either lead to the healing she longed for or to the painful realization that their relationship had come to an end. She spent the week mentally preparing herself, reminding herself that whatever happened, she had taken control of her own heart. No matter what Daniel said or did, she was in charge of her own healing process. And that gave her the strength to face whatever came next. When the day finally arrived, Evelyn dressed carefully, wanting to feel confident but also comfortable. She didn't want to be overly dressed up or underdressed. She just wanted to be herself. She arrived at the cafe a little early, giving herself time to gather her thoughts. As she sat at a small table by the window, her mind raced. She thought about all the memories she had of Daniel, the good ones, the bad ones, and wondered if there was any way to move forward from the pain. She still didn't have all the answers, but she knew this. She couldn't live in the past forever. She needed to move forward, whatever that meant. A few minutes later, Daniel walked into the cafe. He looked nervous but also determined. When their eyes met, she saw the same man she had once loved, but there was something different about him now, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He took a seat across from her, his hands trembling slightly as he placed them on the table. "Thank you for meeting me," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I don't deserve this, but I really hope we can talk." Evelyn took a deep breath, ready to face whatever this conversation would bring. "I'm listening," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. The cafe was quiet, the soft hum of conversations blending with the clinking of coffee cups and silverware. Evelyn felt the weight of Daniel's gaze on her as they sat across from each other. It was as if time itself had slowed down, giving them both a moment to process everything that had happened between them. Daniel's hands were still trembling slightly, but there was a look of resolve in his eyes. He wasn't the same man he had been before, the one who had betrayed her with careless ease. No, this was a man who was fighting to reclaim a piece of himself, to fix what had been broken. "Evelyn," Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I don't expect you to understand everything right away. I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I need to tell you everything. The whole truth." Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had asked for honesty, and now it seemed she was about to get it. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth. After all the lies, could she handle hearing it all? Daniel paused for a moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. Then, as if summoning the courage to face the most painful part of the story, he began. "I wasn't just seeing a therapist because of my issues with trust and commitment," he said quietly. "I wasn't being honest with you about what was really going on in my life. The truth is, I've been carrying a lot of baggage from my past. There are things I never told you, things that I didn't want you to know because I was ashamed. But I realize now that not being honest with you was the biggest mistake I could have made." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The anticipation of his words was unbearable. What could he possibly have been hiding? Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers for understanding. "When I was a teenager, I went through something traumatic. It's not easy for me to talk about, but I think you need to hear it. My father, he wasn't a good man. He was abusive emotionally and physically. I've spent years trying to bury that part of my life, trying to move forward. But the truth is, I never really dealt with it. And when things started getting serious between us, I was scared. Scared that I would mess it up, scared that I wasn't good enough for you. So, instead of confronting my fears, I pushed you away." Evelyn sat in stunned silence. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She had never suspected that there was something so dark and painful lurking behind Daniel's seemingly perfect facade. The man she had loved had been hiding a part of himself, one that, until now, had been too painful to reveal. "I never told you any of this because I was ashamed," Daniel continued, his voice breaking. "I thought if I kept it buried, it wouldn't affect our relationship. But I was wrong. I thought I could control it, but it controlled me. And that's why I made the choices I did. I wasn't thinking about you, Evelyn. I wasn't thinking about the future. I was just reacting to my past, to the pain I've never let go of." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she listened. She had always known there was more to Daniel than met the eye, but she hadn't realized the depth of the struggle he had been facing. It wasn't just about their relationship, it was about his own inner battle, one he had been fighting alone for far too long. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evelyn could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of sadness, empathy, and confusion. She wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't the story she had expected to hear. but somehow it made sense. His betrayal, his sudden distance, the way he had seemed so disconnected, it all clicked into place. "I never wanted to hurt you, Evelyn," Daniel said softly, his eyes filled with regret. "But I did. And I can't change that. All I can do now is try to be a better man. A man who is honest, who faces his demons instead of running from them. And I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm not asking you to take me back. I just need you to know that I'm truly sorry. And I'm working on myself every day." Evelyn wiped a tear from her cheek, her mind racing. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him yet, or if they could ever go back to what they had. But hearing him speak so openly, so vulnerably, had stirred something deep inside her. She could see the man before her wasn't the same person who had betrayed her. He was trying to heal, to confront his own pain. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't completely lost. Maybe there was a chance for them after all. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Daniel," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not closing the door completely. I need time to process everything. And you need to prove to me that you can change. That you can be the man you're telling me you are now. I need to see that." Daniel nodded, a mixture of relief and sadness in his eyes. "I understand. And I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I can be that man." As they sat in the cafe, the weight of the conversation hung between them, but so did something else, an unspoken understanding. It wasn't the end, but it wasn't a beginning either. It was a middle ground, a place where healing could take place if they were both willing to put in the work. Evelyn didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to rush into anything. She needed time to heal, to forgive, and to decide if Daniel truly deserved a second chance. And that, she realized, was the only thing she could control in this chaotic, unpredictable journey of love and forgiveness. The days following their conversation felt like a delicate balance between progress and hesitation. Evelyn knew that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and the weight of Daniel's words still lingered in her heart. It wasn't enough for him to say he was sorry. She needed to see the change in his actions, feel it in the way he treated her, the way he treated himself. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn didn't have all the answers. She didn't know if she would be able to forgive him completely or if their relationship had a future. But she was starting to understand one important thing. Healing wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about rebuilding a foundation from the ground up. Over the next few weeks, their interactions were carefully measured. Daniel sent thoughtful messages, checking in on her, asking about her day. He didn't rush her or push her to make decisions. He understood that it would take time, and he was willing to give her the space she needed. In a way, his patience was a balm to the rawness of her emotions. It showed her that he respected her process, that he wasn't demanding anything from her, but rather allowing her to take the lead. Evelyn, in turn, found herself opening up more, albeit slowly. She had always been a strong woman, capable of handling her own life, but her vulnerability had been tested by Daniel's betrayal. Trust, she realized, was like a fragile glass sculpture. Once shattered, it could be repaired, but the cracks would always remain visible. The difference now was that she was determined to rebuild, not just for him, but for herself. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Evelyn sat in her living room, a cup of tea in hand. She had been reflecting on everything: the highs and lows of her relationship with Daniel, the deep pain of betrayal, and the possibility of a future where trust was restored. It was during these quiet moments of reflection that she realized something crucial. Her healing wasn't about fixing their relationship, it was about fixing herself. She needed to be whole again, regardless of whether or not Daniel was part of her future. She needed to regain her own strength, her sense of self-worth, before she could truly decide whether or not they could move forward. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up to see a message from Daniel. "Hey, Evelyn. I know you're still figuring things out, but I wanted to let you know that I've been going to therapy regularly. I'm committed to making real changes in my life. I know it's going to take time, but I'm here for you no matter what. I'm doing this for myself, but also because I want you to see that I can be the man you deserve." Evelyn read the message twice, letting the words sink in. She could sense his sincerity, his commitment to change. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to her. She smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest. This wasn't the same man who had broken her heart. He was trying. He was showing her in his own way that he was willing to do the work. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment as she thought carefully about her response. She didn't want to say too much, but she didn't want to close the door either. "I appreciate that, Daniel. I can see that you're taking steps to change, and that's important. I still need time, but I'm starting to see the man you're trying to be. Let's keep taking things slow. I'm not ready to make any promises, but I'm not giving up on us either." She hit send and put the phone down. The message felt right, like a small step forward in their journey, but not too big a leap. It was the kind of balance she needed to maintain, a mix of hope and caution, of faith and realism. As the days went on, Evelyn continued to focus on her own well-being. She made time for her friends, went to the gym, and took up painting again, something she hadn't done in months. She found solace in her own company, in the rhythm of creating something beautiful. It was a reminder that her worth wasn't defined by her relationship, but by the person she was becoming. Daniel continued to make efforts, showing up for their occasional meetups, always respectful of the boundaries she set. They talked more, but it was different now. There was no pressure to immediately resolve everything. There was no expectation of a perfect reconciliation. They were both healing in their own ways, and Evelyn found herself beginning to trust him, little by little, not just with her heart, but with her peace of mind. One evening, as they sat in a quiet park, watching the sunset, Daniel spoke up. "Evelyn, I know we're taking this slow, and I know you're still figuring things out. But I want you to know that I'm willing to wait. I'll wait as long as it takes because you're worth it. I'll prove to you that I can be the man you deserve, even if it takes years." Evelyn smiled softly, touched by his words. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was enough for now. Enough to show her that he was committed, not just to her, but to himself and to their future, whatever that might look like. "I'm not sure where this is going, Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm starting to believe that it's okay to take our time. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to keep showing up day by day." Daniel nodded, his expression sincere. "That's all I want. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't a resolution, but it was progress. She had taken control of her healing. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, love could be rebuilt, if both hearts were willing to put in the work.